Some of the things that you might need to take into account when you're living in a foreign country, in particular if you're renting a place, is that for the most part, Southeast Asian countries have a slightly different system for renting. It's not uncommon to be able to rent a place by simply paying a month in advance. It's most unusual to have to pay a bond, although in some cases it does happen. And for the most part, the rental rates are generally way less expensive than you'd expect to pay in either New Zealand, Australia, Canada, or the US. So it's very attractive for people to take long-term rentals. And it seems to me that as the people rent for long terms, they sort of assume an aura of ownership over the property. So it's not uncommon to find people who have lived in a certain location for years and years at a time to assume that the mantle of ownership, in other words, they start to take care of the property, they don't allow visitors to come and go, they act as security agents, you might call, for the property. So all in all, it has an overall positive effect on the actual property. In other words, it's being taken care of, almost as if the people owned it. And that applies even if, even if there's one or two or three or five or 15 apartments or condos in the actual block. The other thing that happens with most rental accommodations in Southeast Asia are the fact that you would need to provide gas for your cooking. For the most part, cooking is done by gas. Hot water is done by Califont, although for the most part, the tropics, hot water is not generally required for a regular household. For your cups of tea and for your cooking, you would be using a hot plate or a gas stove or an electric jug. So the hot water out of the tap is not required. So you need to get used to that. For me, that's simple. I like the cold showers in the tropics. The other issue is that electricity is generally not included in the rent. So you need to take into account a small amount for electricity. Generally, it's less expensive than where we come from, so it's affordable. And the most consuming item on your electricity bill will be, without a doubt, air conditioning. Lucky for me, I just can't live with air conditioning, so I don't have an air conditioning bill. But for those of you who can't live without it, that will consume probably the highest quotient of your electricity bill. Another thing to take into account when you're renting accommodation is that quite often addresses are somewhat confusing, so that if you're having information, letters, bills, bank statements, or even products shipped to you by the online merchants, that sometimes it's a little difficult to receive packets or mail because of the lack of identification of the building, the street, the suburb, or even the postal code if it exists. In some cases, postal codes don't exist. In fact, it's only just recently in New Zealand we've had postal codes. It was always very confusing what to put in the address when you asked for something to be sent to you. So bear that in mind. The other aspect about rental accommodation in Southeast Asia in particular, and I'm talking about Bali when I'm sort of referring to Southeast Asia, is the fact that your situation needs to be available for public transport. Makes it easier for you to get to and from the markets or the bank or the downtown areas. And so once you're looking at where to go and stay, for the most part, markets and local restaurants and services are within walking distance if you're in the built-up areas, and so that you don't need to consider bus stops or transportation hubs the way you would in a city in our countries, because the local transportation is taken care of by push bikes, motor scooters, tuk-tuks, or a myriad of other forms of transport that you can use to get around. Speaking of that, most people would like to have their own transport when they get to a location that they're going to stay in. And the easiest and simplest method for doing that is to buy a motor scooter. I've had several motor scooters over the years. They're cheap, convenient. If you look after them, they don't get stolen. And if you, they're easily, you can take 2 people and 3 people in most cases. I carried my children on the front of the motor scooter all over Thailand and all over Southeast Asia at different times. So motor scooters is the preferred form of transport that I would be using if I was in Bali. I think that's all for this little edition. I'm just spouting out some of these thoughts as they come to my mind. I'm gathering them because I'm going to spend a bit of time in Bali over the next few months. In fact, a friend of mine has expressed the same desire. He's a surfie, comes from New Zealand, and so we might even set up shop together in Bali, either share a 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom condo somewhere in Bali. But I'll bring you up to date on that. Seems to me to be a good solution for now. All right, we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.